Hello, good morning, and welcome to my channel. My name is Lugat Sado, and I teach sociology. It's exciting having you around, and thank you for always looking out for my videos. Today, I want to speak on an important topic, in my opinion, the sociology of democracy. The sociology of democracy, especially here in Nigeria. Understanding how society interprets, revolves around political institutions and policies is kind of important in helping us understand our society. So let's kickstart. How do we understand and comprehend the concept of democracy, especially from a sociological perspective? Sociology is the systematic study of human society, and in its simplest form, it is the scientific study of the interrelationship that exists in human society. And we have established that in human society, there are five basic social institutions within which we can understand and discuss sociology. And these are the family, education, religion, polity, and economy. Now, our focus this morning is on politics. Politics. Now, I like, there are several definitions given to politics, but the one specifically given by Harold Laswell is really germane and important within the context of our discussion. He defined politics as who gets what, when, and how. Politics is who gets what, when, and how. The who has to do with the people, the players in the society. Who gets what? The power. Power. And power is the ability to allocate resources. Actually, politics is resource struggle and resource control. Now, if you take away resource control or resource struggle away from politics, nobody will be interested. Now, the when has to do with the periodic nature of the politics and the system establishing it, whether it's a democracy, whether it's military, whether it's monarchical system of government, or even a traditional system of government. Now, how, again, describes the modus operandi, how one becomes a leader or takes over from another. Now, so that is politics as far as Harold Laswell is concerned. And all over the world, we find a lot of play and interplay of politics. There is contest, there is control, there is communication, there is contention, if you like, and there is collaboration. And there are different systems of governance, different forms of politics that exist. But our focus this morning is on democracy. And there are several definitions that have been given to democracy, but the one provided by the former president of America, Abraham Lincoln, who defined democracy as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democracy is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, what role then does sociology play in helping us understand the democracy? Now, before we look at that, we will need to look at the types of democracy and, of course, the characteristics of democracy. And then we will look at all of these from the sociological lens. Basically, there are two broad types of democracy, which are direct democracies and what you might refer to as representative democracies or indirect democracy. Now, direct democracy is that system of democracy that allows individuals, especially those who are eligible in terms of a particular age, to participate in decision making, in legislation, in execution of such legislation, and in running of the day-to-day activities of a particular society. Now, this democracy is not very much on hand now, especially in our present world. However, it was practiced in Greece, among the Greeks, and of course practiced in several communities, several societies in Africa. Now, in what is presently known as Nigeria, among the Igbo-speaking nation group of people in Nigeria, we have history tells us rather that they practiced what you might call direct democracy, because the Igbos had an egalitarian system of government where every eligible adult male participated in legislation, participated in decision making, and it's cut across all their different clans, villages, and of course their mega villages. So that in itself is a description of direct democracies. Very few societies of the world still operate that. Now, but what is presently in vogue is the indirect, or what you might call representative democracy. It's a situation where majority elect a few and gives them power to legislate on their behalf, to advocate on their behalf, and of course to exercise or enforce the laws on their behalf. And so in a way, I've touched on the three aspects of governance, which has to do with the legislation, the judiciary, and of course the executive. Now, in indirect democracies, or what you call representative democracies, elections are conducted and individuals are saddled with responsibilities. Now, so indirect democracies, or what you might refer to as representative democracies, may manifest in form of presidential system of government or even parliamentary system of government. And in all of these, certain persons are given the responsibility to act on their behalf. Now, let's drive it home as we look at the characteristics of democracies. One of the foremost characteristics of democracy is that there is freedom of the individual. Freedom of the individual. In fact, democracy is synonymous with freedom. In other words, the individual has a right or has a freedom to express his political will without fear, without anything at all whatsoever. Now, let's relate that, because what we're going to do is that as we pick a characteristic, we will relate it to what is operational in Nigeria, and then perhaps admit or agree whether we have democracy in Nigeria or we are just practicing democracy. Now, I will explain to you what I mean by democracy. Now, the freedom of the individual is quite fundamental, because in that freedom, the individual exercises his will. And so the will of the individual cannot be compromised as far as democracy is concerned, as long as the will is within the ambits of the law of that society. So freedom is fundamental while discussing democracy. So in other words, the individual has a right to vote or a right not to vote, a right to be voted for and a right not to be voted for, a right to be political and a right not a right to be apolitical. Now, that freedom suggests or will suggest that every individual is on the same platform. That means that whether you are male or female, irrespective of your race, in societies where you have multiracial groups, or irrespective of ethnicity in a society where you have multi-ethnic group, irrespective of religion in a society that has multi-religious philosophies, the individual is free to express himself. Now, any society that negates that is not practicing democracy. Any society that will not allow her citizens to express themselves freely based on their opinions within the ambits of the law cannot be said to be democratic. Now, you may be quick to say that everyone can vote. No, the point in democracy is not just that you vote, it's the fact that you have the capacity to be voted for. So if people are discriminated and engaged on the basis of what they say they are, in terms of race, or who they say they are, or what they are, in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, then that society is just paying lip service to democracy. Another characteristic of democracy, which is very important, is that the majority rules. So in other words, in a democracy, you don't have a situation where a cabal hijacks the system, whether you call them a political class or not. The majority rules, and they rule by determining who governs them. They rule by determining the nature of legislation that guides them. So in a democracy, for instance, or in a perceived or purported democracy, where the majority don't even have their say, not to talk of having their way, then that is not a democracy. And we find manifestations of that across different societies of the world. But my focus is not on other societies of the world. My focus is on Nigeria. Do we have democracy in Nigeria? Are the majority ruling? For instance, there is an outburst against the plan by the House of Representatives to introduce a bill that intends to compel people to compulsorily immunize people against their will and wish. And the people are saying no. And yet, they have gone ahead with the process. There was a time they wanted to institute another bill, for instance, on social media control. And the people are saying, no, one major advantage of a democracy is freedom of expression. How do you want to create a bill or to sponsor a bill that will hinder the people from expressing themselves freely? So, are the people ruling? In several political parties in Nigeria, the people do not have a voice in determining who their representatives are, because the party leaders decide who they want to field as their candidates. But the party leaders are not the people. The people don't have their say. So a group of persons can sit down and disqualify another person. And you say that's a democracy? No. That is not a democracy. In a democracy, the majority rules. And one way to get the voices of the majority is conducting a plebiscite. And so if you want to find out whether your policies are popular or not, instead of casting a yes or a no vote in your various houses or in your various political parties, conduct a plebiscite. Let the people decide and vote. And nobody says that a plebiscite must involve us coming together. We can do an electronic plebiscite, whether for us to say a yes or a no to a particular policy or an agenda. The majority do not only have their say, they have their way in a democracy. But in Nigeria and in most African societies, the mass, the majority, are relegated to the background. They don't have their voice, and their voices are not heard. In the United States, for instance, the recent killing, broad daylight killing of a black man named Floyd George by a white policeman has sparked up a lot of revolts and, protests, if you like, across the cities and states, and it has even manifested itself across other nations of the earth. The people are saying, let us revisit our policing laws. And a few are saying no. They have refused vehemently. In fact, a few are imposing military might, and they want to nip the people. They want to nail the people. They want to threaten the people, and they are threatening the people to back off the streets. That is not a democracy. That does not describe democracy. Democracy listens to the people. Democracy is not the government of a few. It is a government of the people. Both the few and the majority. Democracy is for all. It is for the majority. It is for the minority. So, you may be a minority. Democracy is supposed to work in your favor. Because in democracy is another good, very good and excellent characteristics of democracy is collaboration and compromise. And that's why people have opportunity to lobby and lobby their way out so that minorities can also have their way. It is a give and take system. It is a civil way of creating and entrenching a system of governance that establishes order such that people are not marginalized or oppressed perpetually. That is a democracy. Another characteristic of democracy is rule of law. The rule of law is very fundamental. It's fundamental because it insists on following the procedures, the rules and regulations governing a society. Now, that is excellent. That means actually that the law should rule. The paper should rule. The system is autopilot. Irrespective of who sits there, there is order. But in most societies of the world, you don't find the rule of law. Even those who claim to have established democracy or democratic structures and systems in their societies negate the rule of law and only adopt it when it suits them. For instance, there are some big presidents in the world who go about on their social media handle and of course on different platforms insisting that citizens have the right to protest. And when their citizens begin to protest, they do something else. That is not democratic. That is not democratic. There are some societies where the system, the leaders who are supposed to use the resources of the society to provide security, to provide systems and structures, such systems and structures like health system, educational system, judiciary system, such that the people can live a good life. Do nothing about that. And yet, they talk about the rule of law. One basic tenet of good governance and democracy all over the world is taking note and making sure that the welfare and the aspirations of the people are never compromised. Any system that compromises the welfare of the people, any system, any government that compromises the welfare, the security of her people is not practicing democracy. Even if the name of the country is called Democratic Republic of XYZ. Democratic Republic of Nigeria or Democratic Republic of America, if you do not enforce the rule of law, if your rule of law is selective, that is not a democracy. That negates the tenets and the principles of democracy. Another characteristic of democracy is equality. Everyone is treated as equal. At least that's what the paper says. And that means that irrespective of your status, you have the right and you should have the capacity to seek for any political office without fear of being disenfranchised. And there are several ways societies of today disenfranchise people. It is true that in most societies of the world we have universal adult suffrage, where every eligible adult has a right to vote and be voted for. But come on, let's think of it. In some societies in Africa, in Europe and in America, if you are not a multi-millionaire, you do not have the right to be voted for. Now, you may think you have the right, but as a civil servant who earns less than $10,000 per annum, what right do you have then to contest an election that says that for you to show your interest in that election by way of enrolling or taking up a nomination form, you need to apply with 25,000 US dollars? That in itself has disenfranchised you. And so, people may not be disenfranchised anymore on the basis of the color of their skin, but people are disenfranchised economically. A lot of people are disenfranchised financially. And so, they cannot contest elections. I take myself as an example. I live in Nigeria, and I am not apolitical. I would love to be a governor or become a president. But honestly, I can't imagine it. I can't think about it because I can't finance that ambition. Any democracy that is expensive, as it is across most nations of the world, is not democratic. In fact, it has lost the character of being a democratic system and needs to be reincubated. Reincubated because there is need for it to go back to the incubator and get itself transfused again with democratic tenets and tendencies for it to manifest as a democratic system. Equality should not be on paper. Equality should not be alone on the lip of the people. Equality should be practical. And that is what drives democracy. When everyone feels the same, everyone can aspire to be anything. That is democracy, and not the democracy that is the order of the day. Again, in a democracy, there is free and fair election. Now, in the absence of a free and fair election, what you have is an impositionary system of government. And that's not a democracy, where a few hand select or hand pick people. And that means that what you are having is not a democracy, it's a godfathercracy. You don't need godfathers in this era, especially as far as politics is concerned. Because a lot of business people who have taken to politics do so because of the gains in it. And you'll agree with me that politics also has this dimension of economy. In fact, if you practice democracy, what you are likely to have is a capitalist economic system, or even a socialist economic system. But the point is that the laws on ground must ensure that everyone can vote and his vote should count. And everyone can be voted for, and the votes that accrue to that person should count. There should be no manipulation of electoral processes. And electoral processes do not begin on election day. They begin at our various respective political parties. And this is where internal democracy is very fundamental. You know, to put it in its simplest form, internal democracy is that democratic system and structure built into political party that ensures that the democratic tenets as established in the larger community or society is entrenched in that political party.
and within which their representatives or their candidates are elected. There can't be a democracy if there is no effective internal democracy. And I dare to say that most countries in Africa do not have internal democracy. Most countries in Africa lack what internal democracy is all about. And so if there is no internal democracy, the godfathers and the business politicians will hijack the system and impose themselves or their stooges in those political parties. And so we have a situation, in the words of Dr. Chika Osagba, where the electorate are faced with the dilemma of choosing between two devils. And of course, they go for the lesser devil. That in itself is one of the challenges of modern day democracy, especially in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. So we need an established, a well-entrenched internal democratic system. Gone are the days, and gone should be the days, when few political leaders in their political parties decide the fate of aspirants and candidates in their political parties. Everyone in the society must have a say and a voice. And that means that the regulatory bodies must ensure there is entrenched internal democracy. This is very fundamental if we must make progress. You understand this, as I close, that Nigeria is not as young as some of you think anymore. Our country, even though in fragmented parts, has been in existence before some European countries ever emerged. And in terms of having an established democratic system, we had it. Before the colonial intrusion, we had it. In the Benin Kingdom, for instance, we had our established democratic monarchical system. Now, I know that some people will say, what do you mean by established democratic monarchical system? There are different forms of monarchies, and there are different forms of democracies. In the UK, for instance, or in Britain, you have what they call the constitutional monarch. That in itself is giving a democratic backing to a monarchical system of government. So she is called, the Queen of England is called a constitutional monarch, as it is in some other societies of the world. In Africa and in Nigeria, before the introduction of colonialists in our society, we had our own constitutional monarchs, and they still exist. The Reverend Great Omonobanedo Kwakpolokpolo, the Oba of Benin, is revered and respected in the Benin Kingdom and in the entire world. He is our traditional leader and ruler. Beyond the Oba, if you go away from the Benin Kingdom, you have the Sultan of Sokoto, for instance, you have the Emir of Kano, for instance, you have the Oni of Ife, you have the Okaijesa of Esan land, for instance. All of these are strong traditional rulers that have certain roles within our system and society. But the focus is not on the traditional rulers. The focus is that let the people rule. So letting the people rule means letting them rule. Letting the people rule means letting them rule. So when Nigeria got her independence in 1960 and became an independent country, we had the privilege of having our own elected officials, although the elections in 1959 were conducted by the colonialists. But in 1963, we became a republic. And since then, we have had several military interventions. But in 1979 again, the Second Republic started, and of course was overthrown by the military dictators on 31st of December 1983. And from that time till 29th of May 1999, we were under military rule. And since this new dispensation started, we have had about 21 years of uninterrupted democracy. So one could say that we have done well. Yes, at least on paper. But we can do better. Democracy should enhance the standard of living of the people. Democracy should bring the government to the people and not take the government far away from the people. No one should sit in Abuja and determine how Edo State should be governed. No one should sit in Lagos and determine how Edo State should be governed. No one should sit in Benin City and determine how Irua, Esan Central, should be governed. Let the people decide. The days of godfatherism are over. It is now time for the people to take authority that actually belongs to them and drive our society into progress. We have retarded a lot, and enough of retardation. The time for progress is now. What are the advantages of democracy? One basic advantage of democracy is that democracy brings the government to the people. And so, the people are participants in their day-to-day governance. That's one advantage. So it helps to drive progress. It helps to drive productivity. Another advantage of a democracy is that rights are protected. Rights are protected. No matter how few you may be in terms of your class, you are not oppressed. Your individual rights is protected. And fundamental human rights and basic rights are quite important in any system. No system should be tolerated. And one basic right that we have is the right to life. Even prisoners have the right to life. But it's disturbing that the police, for instance, can kill someone who hasn't been condemned by a competent court. It's disturbing that bandits can take over our communities in northeast Nigeria, in north central Nigeria, in south Nigeria, and kill people, and our government is kind of helpless. It's disturbing. Do you call that a democracy? No. One advantage of a democracy is that it listens to the people and is able to understand the fears of the people. Is able to understand the concerns of the people and does everything within its power to make sure that the fears and the concerns are addressed. So we need democracy. We need democracy in Africa. We need democracy in Nigeria. It is true we just had our Democracy Day on June 12th, the first anniversary, I guess. And thank God for the founding fathers and those who laid down their lives to achieve this democracy. But the present day politicians need to be told that the wealth you are amassing to yourself, for those some of you who are corrupt, will take you nowhere. Because from a religious perspective, because I'm Christian, and the Bible says that all of these are vanities upon vanities. So why not leave a landmark like Abraham Lincoln? Why not leave a landmark like Alhaji Tafawa Balewa? Why not leave a landmark like Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe? Why not leave a landmark like Obafemi Awolowo? Why not leave a landmark like Chief Anthony Naholo? Why not leave a landmark that posterity will remember you for? These four names are called among several many entrenched democracy in Nigeria over 50 years ago, and their landmarks are still present for us to see. We need democracy, and democracy should return. Thank you for being part of this. I hope that it's been exciting, and together we've x-rayed not just the sociology of democracy, but actually we have looked at democracy in Africa and Nigeria with a view to unraveling some of the, if you like, anomalies that are evident in our own democracy. Our hope is that our policy makers, our lawmakers, our executives, and all those who are saddled with this responsibility of realigning our system will take heed and adjust our democracy adequately so that we can enjoy the dividends of democracy. If you've appreciated this and it's been of use to you, I'm appealing to you to help me share this video, help me share this video on your various social media media handles. And if you've not subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can just hit on the subscription button, and of course on the alarm bell, notification bell, help me click it so that anytime I come online live or I upload any new video, you'll be alerted immediately. Once again, my name is Lugard Sado and I teach sociology. Thank you very much for being part of today. Have a lovely day and God bless you. Stay safe and enjoy your day.